Hello, welcome to Where Nerdy is Cool, and this is a sponsored video by Push Plastic. Now, this time around, we did the tour previously. If you didn't see that video, I have that linked up above over here, so you can check that out. And while there, one of the things I've always wanted to ask a filament manufacturer is all about filament drying. There's a lot of conflicting information on the interwebs, on YouTube and elsewhere and such. Do we really need to dry all of our filaments before 3D printing them? My big question was especially on PLA, PETG, and ABS, ASA, and those. Pretty well aware that nylon is certainly one you do have to do. So in this video, we're talking to Joshua Van Vleet, and he's the plant manager at Push Plastic, and he is going to have a discussion with me about the pros and cons of filament drying. Are you ready? Here we go. Hey, we're back, and this time I want to talk about now we did a tour recently of Push Plastic. We were talking about filament, how it's made. And there's a lot of videos on YouTube, there's a lot of discussions all over the place about whether you should be drying your filament or not. And I got a wonderful education from Josh here from Push Plastic, and I'm gonna have you share the education you gave me. So basically the wrong advice, or the street creds all say that we should be drying our filament before 3D printing it, for best results, to eliminate stringing and some other issues. So here's a spool of PLA, and what would be your advice to folks that are buying their materials, and do you have to dry before use? And explain that science to me.
Yeah, exactly. So what we're talking about is hygroscopy. That's the process that moisture affects polymers. And I wouldn't necessarily say that everything everyone says online is false, so much as it's just not complete.
Good.
It is, it's a lot more complicated than people want to make it. So the thing about hygroscopy is the hydrophobic nature of filament is way used to describe how it absorbs moisture. And that percentage of hygroscopic nature that these, especially PLA, has is so low, it's basically minuscule. And especially when you're running it through an FDM 3D printer, while it does absorb moisture, it shouldn't and probably doesn't absorb as much moisture as you think, to the effect that it would actually mess up your prints. And usually a lot of the issues that people experience that they base on moisture, or they try to blame moisture, has to do with settings or problems with the formulation of the material they're using, or any number of things. We found in our experience that some companies, they call it PLA, and it's not actually PLA. They just use it as this is an easy to print / name that people would recognize from marketing. So one of the examples of that is flexible PLA. There's no such thing as a flexible PLA.
Okay.
But they call it flexible PLA because it's a flexible material that's easy to print like PLA, typically.
Got it.
And so a lot of folks, so they get confused because they're like, well, my PLA needs to be dried. Well, maybe what you're actually printing with is PHA. And maybe the issue you're experiencing is that it's being advertised to print at 200 to 220 when it really ought to be printed at 160 to 180.
Oh, that low, okay.
That low. It can be for some of these materials, depending on what they're made out of, and they don't disclose what they're made out of.
And that's the rub.
So how do you know? How do I prove it?
Yeah, I mean,
right?
I could go on Amazon and see all kinds of materials that don't offer a safety data sheet, a technical data sheet. So, so the PLA, the actual, the base polymer is probably not going to pull in a lot of moisture, but what we don't know is, and due to trade secrets or whatever, you don't know what's in there for additives.
Could be an additive that makes it more hygroscopic.
Okay.
But what we use is NatureWorks 4040 3D resin, and it does not need to be dried to print it.
I just want to do a quick pause and say, if you're enjoying content like this, please give me a like, subscribe, and if you want to help me even more, because the YouTube algorithm is brutal, please check out my Patreon. I have several different levels of membership that you can contribute to, and if you're not a Patreon person, I also have Buy Me a Coffee. Thank you for being a viewer, and on with the video. Okay.
You should be able to just print it right in your printer, and it should print at 220 on all the popular printers, and it should print just fine without having to hit a dryer. And that's what I suggest is everyone try printing with it without drying it and see what happens.
Okay.
See if it works.
Now,
no matter what your climate.
Right, yeah, because I'm in the boonies of Maine, you know, where I live, and I'm down here in Northwest Arkansas now. So the other question I'd have about this is, we talked about a little bit off camera, is so you've done your 3D print and you've left your filament loaded in the machine and you ignore it for a week or two, you come downstairs or wherever your printer is and you find that the filament is broken.
Yes, the filament's broken, yeah.
Explain that to me.
Yeah, and so that's where some people get a little confused, and it could be anything, honestly. Like, it's kind of hard to quantify a lot of this. That's why I say it's complicated. But if it were moisture, if it were what they call hydrolysis, which is where the moisture comes in and actually breaks apart the polymer chains, and I described that a little bit with the dryers on the tour, that is permanent. Like, you have to add a polymerizing agent to rebuild those molecular bonds. Like, it actually destroys the polymer chains. Okay. Hydrolysis is really bad. And a filament dryer is not going to reduce that, not going to reverse that. So if you have an issue with your filament being brittle and then you throw it in a dryer at 60 C or thereabouts the glass transition temperature of your material, and it's magically not brittle anymore, that wasn't moisture, because the moisture is irreversible. Like, you just can't reverse it. And so what that typically is, though, is annealing. And that's where a lot of folks get a little confused, because annealing isn't a very common term. But your filament has a memory, and right now it's on this spool. And the longer it's on the spool, especially with PLA, it actually conforms to its shape over time. It's a little bit ductile. Like, it'll just sit there and it'll just remember where it's at. And the longer it's there, the more it'll remember it. It kind of flows just a little bit. And so when you take it and you put it in your tube and you straighten it out, well, now you've bent it. And depending on the filament, depending on a lot of variables, you get a bunch of micro cracks along the inside of that curve. Okay. And then when you leave that set inside your tube, those cracks can grow. And especially when you disturb it, when you pull it out, it can finish breaking the filament. Yeah. So we call that crazing. It actually is a filament crazing. And that's why we say don't leave your filament loaded unless you want to jam your AMS. Like, you know,
well, that's
you don't really want to.
Especially with the Bamboo Lab machines.
Yeah.
I said my A1, you know, with the AMS light, you know, if you leave that, you know, it's going to break someplace where you can't get it, and then you got to remove the tubing from the AMS hub, and it's just a nightmare. And
then if you take a filament that's a touch brittle because of how it was manufactured, not because of moisture, it's just a touch brittle, and then you anneal it, what you also do is you increase the toughness of it. Because annealing is where you excite, because it's a crystalline lattice, it's a crystalline structure. And so when you get it to its glass transition temperature, the molecules get to where they're just a little free of each other, but they're not in a flow state. So they don't change shape, they just relax and they come apart. And then when you slowly cool it after it's been in your dryer, then they lock even tighter than they did before, and it actually makes them stronger, so they're less inclined to craze.
Okay.
And so that's why you see, oh, I threw it in my dryer, now it's not brittle anymore. It's like, well, you annealed it, and that's great. And the other reason that tends to solve problems that people don't always attribute to annealing is because when you lock those molecules in tighter, you also increase the heat resistance. So if you had a filament that perhaps was a lower grade resin or not even PLA at all, we don't know, then, you know, maybe it's too hot to print at 220, but then you anneal it and you've increased its temperature resistance, and now it will print at 220 a lot better because it's been annealed.
Now, another one that's always a nightmare to print for a lot of new users is in PETG.
Yes.
Where does that fall on our thinking with drying? Because that's a frequent thing where we're told, PETG, dry before use, you know, because it will reduce the stringing. Or is it like the PLA example where there's a lot of asterisks, it depends on how it's manufactured?
There are a lot of asterisks, but and this is where we get in the weeds on the moisture argument, because it does actually improve things. Like, it does not hurt to dry your filament. It does improve your filament. Not only does it anneal it, but it does remove moisture. A minuscule amount of moisture, especially with the drying systems that aren't desiccated. They're literally just a hot box. It just has the same hot air circulating inside of it. That moisture doesn't know where to go. So now you have a warm, damp spool. You don't have a dry spool.
So you're talking about where it's extruded from their production line, like?
Well, I just mean, like, if you get one of the filament spool boxes and it doesn't have air exchanging and it doesn't have desiccation, it's just a box like a food dehydrator. Yeah. And it just kind of sits there and it just keeps your filament warm.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, some of the filament dryers don't actually
do anything, you know, and yet they work.
Yeah, I've seen a few filament
know?
dryers where I had some where after it was run for a while, you could see moisture up top. And it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
well, it's great that you got the water up, but now it's on top.
Yeah,
And
well, yeah, and it is out of the filament, and if it drips back down on the filament, will it absorb? Maybe not.
yeah, because I remember
know?
you had mentioned when we were talking off camera, you had mentioned that, for example, your material comes off the line, it goes to the water tank, and it gets air blasted. But
Yes.
some other manufacturers don't do that.
Yeah, yeah. So sometimes that's one of the benefits of our process going onto the bulk spool is you do get perhaps some residual moisture depending on the facility and the manufacturer. And when they wind directly off the line, they can actually trap moisture inside that vac seal pack with that desiccant. And so they'll have it come right out of the water tank. They'll probably have an air blow off. They might even have rags like we have, but there could still be a little bit of residual moisture on the surface of that, and it goes straight onto the end spool. It might even be a cardboard spool. Well, it'll soak it up. They vac seal it, and then they send it to the customer. And once that, it's just in there in the moisture, you know, and that doesn't necessarily matter for something like this. Like, believe it or not, you could have, there's a little moisture in here, and I don't know that it would drastically affect your printing. It might minorly.
Yeah.
And it might a little more on PETG, but PETG is one of those situations, and there's some good videos online about it, that shows that it's not necessarily a 50% increase in performance. It's more like a 2 or 3%, and it mainly affects PETG's clarity. And a lot of the stringiness that people experience with the PETG goes back to that temperature argument. You know, and it's like when you extrude filament out of a 3D printer, you've got two options. You're either too hot or too cold.
Right.
And if you're too cold, then you're going to have positive pressure that's going to, when you try to do a retraction or you try to move the tool head, it'll slowly come out, and it usually curls off to one side, and that's what makes your strings partly. When it's too hot, it's too loose. So when you do your retraction, you try to move, it dribbles out, and that also makes a string. Yeah. So you have this like sweet zone of hot and cold to prevent stringing on PETG in particular, because it has it doesn't flow as well. The melt flow on it is a lot higher, or it's a lower melt flow for PETG than other materials, and that's why it doesn't want to break, and that's why it's more stringy. But if you get the exact perfect temperature, and that's where maybe annealing is pushing people into that zone, then you'll get rid of the stringing. Because I print with PETG all the time. I don't have any stringing issues, and I don't dry it. And I store it in an open garage, you know, and it's like 50% humidity all the time here in Arkansas, and you just got to get the temperatures right, you know, because a lot of moisture hangs out on the surface anyways, and whenever it goes through your hot end, that's the first part that's heated, and most of our 3D printers don't have a tight enough tolerance inside that heat throat, or that heater, the throat of the heater, to trap that moisture in to create pressure that would actually cause a problem. Usually it's just going to vent back out the top of the extruder through the tube and everything.
Sure.
So a lot of that moisture that might be on the surface from humidity, the hygroscopic action, if you will, actually would cook off pretty soon after it gets heated, before it even gets liquefied. And it certainly wouldn't necessarily get mixed in to the filament because of the way it's not, you know, there's no screw involved stirring it in like we have over there. Because that's part of the problem with moisture on the resin is it gets stirred all up inside the polymer, and it gets mixed all throughout the polymer when it goes through the screw. Whereas a 3D printer, it's laminar. It just goes straight through. The outside's the outside, and it comes out. Because you can do some really cool experiments. There's some other videos where people put a core of something around inside of a filament, and when you print it and you cut that print in half, you can see all those cores and all the extrusions, you know, and that's because it's laminar.
Yeah.
And so that's where the surface moisture and stuff like that isn't as relevant, just because of the mechanics and the physics behind everything. You know, it's not like it's foaming, and the exception to that is nylon.
I'll give you this one.
Yeah, the exception to that is nylon.
So we all know that nylon can be a bugger to work. I did a video recently where I dried nylon, and what I received was not a vacuum sealed bag.
Exactly.
And, you know, when it was printing, it sounded like I was cooking bacon. You know, it was really bad. But I ran it through the dryer for 12 hours at 70°C, printed it again, and it looked fantastic. I'm not a big nylon, you know, printer, but I used default settings, and it came out great for that benchy. But so if you receive a packet of nylon, in your case you have carbon fiber nylon there, what's your recommendations prior to printing with it?
Yeah, so the difference between nylon and PLA is what you're experiencing isn't hydrolysis. It's kind of like a sponge. So due to the way these molecules fit together, they like to have water in between them. So basically you've made a sponge here of sorts. And it's well known with nylon that it really likes to absorb moisture, and it's also called being hygroscopic. But the damage that happens is a physical deformation, not a chemical destruction. So it actually swells. Nylon actually will swell up like a water balloon if you put it in water for a long period of time. That's why they don't use it for any sort of water contact gears or anything like that. That's why they use other plastics instead. So nylon's well known, and it is part of why this whole room is dried, is because we store nylon in here, and it doesn't hurt to have everything else in here too. It's just nice and convenient. We don't have to tell people stock nylon in the dry room and everything else in the not dry room. It's just put it all in the stock room and it's dry. So it's nice and easy. But prior to dish, you do want to dry nylon.
Okay, good.
You do.
Because you got yourself a nice plastic sponge.
Yeah, and there's enough moisture in here. And I've heard numbers up to 30%.
Oh, wow.
Where when this goes through your hot end, even with that laminar flow, that water's all inside of it now. And so that bacon popping is actually steam popping, so it's more like popcorn.
Yep.
Where you've got the air or the water inside the filament getting excited by the heat from the hot end and turning to steam, which expands and creates little bubbles. And you end up with a nice foamy print that you don't want to be foamy.
Yeah, exactly. It looked like a foam print, but I didn't want foam print. Yeah.
And nylon's one of those, BVOH, PVA, and certain other, most fiber fills, you want to be careful. But there are some fiber fills that are impervious. They're not bothered by moisture. And so I just recommend that everybody just kind of take a second look at the moisture argument and their thoughts and experiment. You know, we love playing around with things. We like testing things. See if I know what I'm talking about, you know, and run some prints with changing the temperature settings instead of drying it.
Right.
You know?
Now, so we know nylon's an offender, only because I'm in this beautiful room full of filaments, and if I only had a shopping cart and no one was looking.
Yes.
But, you know, what about your ABS, ASA? What about, you know, that family of
yes,
plastics?
ABS can absorb moisture. It's a lot slower than this, but it can. And again, it doesn't hurt to dry it. It really doesn't. But I print with ABS without drying it.
Okay. ASA, same story.
ASA is the same story. You know, and while they are more susceptible to hydrolysis and more susceptible to absorbing moisture, that doesn't mean that it's on a scale that matters for FDM 3D printing. You know, because the process that we're doing here is we're taking a really thin monofilament and we're extruding it through a hot end by just forcing it through like a hot glue gun. That's a pretty simple process.
Right.
So unless there's enough volume of moisture in there that it's actually causing foaming, then it's not a problem. And where people get a little, again, it's complicated, where people get a little confused is sometimes their temperature will be a little hot.
Yeah. Like
with TPU, I see this a lot. Everyone's like, you've got to dry your TPU, you've got to try your TPU. It's like, yes and no. TPU is already past this glass transition state. That's why it's flexible.
Right.
And so it's really susceptible to what I call frying. And that's where you go a little too hot, and you can do this with ABS, you can do this with ASA, where you go a little too hot and you're actually causing the chemicals to separate out. Oh. And so you're ending up with something that looks kind of like it might be moisture, but it's actually a different chemical outgassing. It's a different chemical being burned off.
And you probably don't want to inhale that.
No, it's not a good thing to inhale. But you can have certain things that I call frying, where it's like you've just gone too hot, and maybe if you lower your temperature down a little bit, and if you notice, it's lower the temperature, lower the temperature, lower the temperature. I keep saying that. Lower the temperature just a little bit.
There's a trend here, yes.
And give it a shot and see if it works, because annealing raises its temperature resistance. And there's you know, correlation isn't causation. You know, there's lots of ways we could describe what's causing this, because it's kind of like the cold or the flu. They have the same fever.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, what is it exactly? And that's why there's so much back and forth online about it, and so many anecdotal, but this worked and that didn't, and this did and that didn't, is because it's not incredibly clear.
Yeah, clear as mud sometimes. Okay.
Yes.
So basically, you know, long story short, you know, the drying doesn't really hurt anything, but it's not doing what you probably think it's doing.
Probably not doing what you think it's doing, for sure. It's probably doing something different that maybe I'm not even aware of sometimes. Because nice. Heat does a lot of really cool things to the plastics, and that's thermoplastics, that's the science.
Okay.
Know.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you. I knew nylon was a big offender, but I have dryers all over the house, and like I said, from my 3D prints, I usually keep them at whatever the recommended temperature is. But I think part of that is, and I know we chatted about this a little bit, is not so much even the moisture, but I just like protecting the filament. So I just use, whether it's a filament dryer or even a dry box with dust in there, because I'm protecting the material from dust.
Yes.
Because I feel like not only is humidity or moisture sometimes a question mark, but boy, you get dust in there or other contaminants, and that can really mess up a print.
Yeah, for sure. And another reason I want people to kind of challenge your thinking is these dryers use up a lot of power. You mentioned that you've got a lot of power going through your print farm because you got a lot of printers going on.
Yeah.
And that's something else. We're wanting to be environmentally conscious as a technology. We don't want to apply electricity where we don't need to apply electricity.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it be cool if we didn't need to dry it and all we had to do is print it a little colder and everything would work out just fine?
Right. Yeah. I catch your drift. Nice. Cool. Well, thank you for answering our questions on drying when it's appropriate and when it may not be.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Anytime.
Okay, so there it is, the kind of the pros and cons of drying your filament. Now, I know Josh is really looking forward to seeing the comment section light up down below, whether you agree or disagree with him. So let's make his day. Throw in some comments, let us know. Do you use a filament dryer? What materials? Do you see an improvement or no change? So let's get it started. Okay, so that's about it for this video. If you want to see what I'm up to, I encourage you to check out my social media. I am on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter/X, and of course, here on YouTube. As always, I thank you for watching, and please remember, please print safe.